The great hall of the monastery was dimly lit by flickering candles. The scent of incense still lingered in the air, mingling with the aged fragrance of sacred manuscripts. The man hunched over the writing desk held a quill between his fingers, but his hands remained still. He was not writing, he simply stared ahead, as if seeing something beyond the visible world. "Why have you stopped, Master?" asked Rinaldo, his loyal companion and secretary. The man lifted his deep, enigmatic gaze. It was Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor. "Everything I have written is nothing but straw." Rinaldo's heart faltered at the response. How could this man, the greatest thinker of his time, dismiss his monumental work? For years, Thomas had illuminated the church with his wisdom. His words had shaped kings and popes. His arguments had challenged the greatest minds of the past and provided a new foundation for Christian theology. But now, in the face of divine revelation, he saw it all as nothing. In that moment, something changed forever. This is the end of the story of Saint Thomas Aquinas. But to understand the weight of this moment, we must go back to the beginning, to the boy who once asked, "Who is God?" The year was 1225. The castle of Roccasecca stood proudly atop the rolling hills of the Lazio region in Italy. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the winds of the night storm whipped through the banners of the noble Aquino family. That night, a child was born who would change the course of Christian thought. Thomas, son of Count Landulf of Aquino and Countess Theodora. From an early age, Thomas displayed an insatiable curiosity. While other children ran through the castle playing with wooden swords, he was captivated by the monks who came from the Abbey of Monte Cassino. He loved sitting among the Benedictine friars, listening to their chants echoing through the stone walls. One day, while listening to the monks praising God, he turned to his mother and asked, "Who is God?" The question echoed in the Countess's heart. Her son was not like other noble children. There was within him a thirst for understanding that went beyond what his social status could offer. At the age of 5, Thomas was sent to be educated at the monastery of Monte Cassino. There, he learned Latin, philosophy, and the Holy Scriptures. But his heart longed for more. He didn't just want to learn about God. He wanted to understand the mysteries of faith. However, his family had other plans. His father wanted him to become the abbot of Monte Cassino, a position of prestige and power. But God had a very different path in store for Thomas. At 19, Thomas made a decision that shocked his family. He chose to join the order of preachers, the Dominicans. Unlike the Benedictines who lived in stable monasteries, the Dominicans were mendicants, traveling from city to city, preaching and teaching. For a young nobleman, such a choice was unthinkable. And Aquino, living as a simple friar, relying on the charity of others. His father was furious. His mother, Countess Theodora, was devastated. Upon hearing of Thomas's decision, his brothers, who served the empire, were sent to capture him, and so they did. On his way to Paris, where he was supposed to study, he was kidnapped and taken back to the family castle. For a year, he was held prisoner within the very walls of his own home. They tried everything to make him abandon his decision. Promises of wealth, titles, a comfortable life. But nothing could change Thomas's mind. Desperate, his brothers resorted to a final measure. They sent a woman into his room, hoping to seduce him. But Thomas, in an act of courage, grabbed a burning log from the fireplace and drove her away. That night he knelt and prayed, asking God to keep him pure. According to tradition, an angel appeared and girded his body with a cord of chastity. Unable to break his determination, his mother finally relented and allowed him to escape through a window, climbing down a rope made of bedsheets. He set off for Paris, where he would at last join the Dominicans. At the University of Paris, Thomas met his mentor, Saint Albert the Great. Albert quickly realized that this quiet and introspective young man was different. In the classroom, while other students engaged in passionate debates, Thomas listened and reflected. His silence led some to call him the dumb ox. But Albert the Great smiled and prophesied, "You call him the dumb ox, but I tell you, one day this ox will bellow so loudly that his voice will be heard throughout the world." And so it happened. Thomas excelled in his studies, immersing himself in the works of Aristotle and reconciling them with Christian faith. His ideas were revolutionary, proving that faith and reason were not opposed, but complementary. He wrote numerous works, his greatest contribution being the Summa Theologiae, a true map for understanding the mysteries of God. Yet, despite his brilliance, Thomas always remained humble. With every new insight, his soul inclined even more toward prayer. Then, in December of 1273, something happened that would change his life forever. During Mass, Thomas had a mystical vision. What he saw was never revealed, but the experience was so profound that he stopped writing altogether. "Everything I have written is straw." That was what he kept repeating to Reynaldo. That man, who had dissected the greatest mysteries of faith with his brilliant mind, now understood that true wisdom was not found in books, but in the direct vision of God. Shortly after, Thomas was called to take part in the Council of Lyon. On the journey, he fell gravely ill and was taken in by the Abbey of Fossa Nova. There, on a simple bed, the man who had taught about angels prepared to become one with them. He received the last sacraments, and before departing, murmured his final prayer, "I receive you, O price of my redemption. For your love, I have studied, kept vigil, and worked. Now all my work is in your hands." On March 7th, 1274, Saint Thomas Aquinas left this world, leaving behind an immortal legacy. 5 decades later, he was canonized. His thought would shape the Church forever. Today, we remember not only his intellect, but his humility, his relentless pursuit of God. One of the most well-known stories about him highlights his profound humility. Despite being one of the greatest intellectuals in church history, Thomas never considered himself wise. It is said that after writing his famous Summa Theologiae, he had such an intense mystical experience during Mass that, upon returning to his work, he told his secretary, Reynaldo, that everything he had written seemed like straw compared to the greatness of God. Because of this, he never completed his masterpiece, leaving it unfinished. Another interesting fact is related to his physical stature. Thomas was a man of great size and a robust build, which earned him the nickname the Dumb Ox during his studies at the University of Paris. His classmates thought he was slow and unintelligent, but his teacher, St. Albert the Great, predicted that one day the voice of this ox will echo throughout Christendom. And indeed, his theology became one of the most influential in the Catholic Church. There is also a remarkable story about his piety and devotion. One day, while praying before the crucifix, Thomas heard a divine voice ask him, "Thomas, you have written well. Of me, what do you desire as a reward?" Without hesitation, he replied, "Nothing but you, Lord." That response sums up his entire life, a man who sought truth but above all sought God. Finally, another interesting fact about his canonization is that, despite his immense importance to the Church, there was some hesitation in declaring him a saint. He was a thinker and philosopher, and many believed that sainthood was more closely tied to mystical experiences and physical miracles. However, after several testimonies about his virtue and a supposed miracle attributed to his intercession, he was finally canonized in 1323, less than 50 years after his death. The story of Saint Thomas Aquinas is, above all, a testimony that true wisdom is not just the accumulation of knowledge, but the humility to recognize that before God, everything we know is insignificant. He was a genius, one of the greatest thinkers in human history. Yet at the end of his life, he understood that a direct experience with God surpasses any theory, any philosophical argument, or any book ever written. It makes me wonder, how often do we focus so much on understanding faith with our minds, but forget to feel it with our hearts? Another aspect that deeply moves me is his perseverance in his vocation. He faced opposition from his own family, was kidnapped, imprisoned, and tempted to abandon his calling, but he never wavered. It makes me reflect on how often we give up on something out of fear of rejection or because of difficulties. The life of Saint Thomas teaches us that when we follow a true calling, no obstacle is great enough to turn us away from our path. And what can we say about his response to God? Nothing but you, Lord. In a world where we are constantly tempted to seek recognition, wealth, and success, this response is a powerful reminder that the only thing that truly matters is being close to God. Everything we achieve, learn, and accomplish should lead us to him, not to our own glorification. Lastly, his story makes me think about the balance between faith and reason. He saw no contradiction between philosophical thought and spirituality. On the contrary, he showed that intelligence can be a bridge to God. Today, when many try to separate science and faith, Saint Thomas teaches us that the true search for truth always leads us to the Creator. His life inspires me not only to seek knowledge, but also to seek God with a sincere heart. After all, at the end of the journey, all that truly matters is being able to say, as he did, "Everything I have done, Lord, was for you." The Catholic Church recognizes Saint Thomas Aquinas as one of its greatest saints and intellectuals, seeing in him a model of holiness, wisdom, and faithfulness. His theological and philosophical legacy is fundamental to the understanding of Christian doctrine, and his works remain essential for the formation of priests, theologians, and scholars of the faith. Since his canonization in 1323, the Church has always exalted him as a true master of Christian truth. In 1567, Pope Pius V granted him the title of Doctor of the Church, recognizing his importance as one of the pillars of Catholic theology. Because of his profound spiritual and intellectual insight, Saint Thomas came to be known as the Doctor Angelicus, angelic doctor, as his intellect and purity of heart reflected an almost heavenly light. His greatest legacy to the Church was the Summa Theologiae, in which he reconciled Christian faith with human reason, especially through Aristotelian philosophy. This work demonstrated that faith is not opposed to reason, but rather that both walk together in the search for truth. The Church adopted this teaching as one of the foundations of Catholic theology, and even today, many of his arguments are used to explain and defend the faith. St. Thomas's deep Eucharistic spirituality was also profoundly recognized by the Church. He composed the beautiful liturgical hymns for the Feast of Corpus Christi, such as the Tantum Ergo, which is still sung today during adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. His love for the Eucharist is one of the most remarkable aspects of his life, showing that his theology was not merely an intellectual pursuit, but a living experience of faith. Above all, the Church sees in St. Thomas Aquinas an example of humility and a sincere search for God. Despite being a genius, he was never arrogant or proud. On the contrary, his final great lesson was to acknowledge that, in the face of God's greatness, all human knowledge is limited. His witness continues to inspire both the faithful and scholars to deepen their faith without fear of reason, for as the Church teaches, truth cannot contradict truth. St. John Paul II, Fides et Ratio. The story of St. Thomas Aquinas leaves humanity with a powerful message. True wisdom is not found only in intellectual knowledge, but in the sincere pursuit of God. He teaches us that faith and reason are not enemies, but rather two wings that lift us toward the truth. His example shows that we can and should use our intelligence to understand the mysteries of life, but always with humility, recognizing that the highest knowledge is knowing that God is the source of all truth. Another fundamental lesson from his life is the importance of perseverance in one's vocation. He faced opposition from his own family, was kidnapped, and was tempted to abandon his calling, yet he remained steadfast. His story teaches us that when God calls us to a mission, we must follow it with courage, without fear of difficulties or the judgment of others. Saint Thomas also teaches us about humility and detachment. Despite his brilliance, he never boasted about his knowledge. On the contrary, at the end of his life, after a mystical experience, he declared that everything he had written was straw compared to the greatness of God. This reminds us that no success, no material or intellectual achievement can compare to the experience of being close to God. Finally, his devotion to the Eucharist teaches us that encountering Christ is the center of our faith. He composed prayers and hymns that are still used in the Church today, and his life was a testimony that the greatest treasure we have is not in this world, but in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. The message of Saint Thomas Aquinas to humanity is clear. Seek truth through reason, but never forget that the greatest knowledge is to love God above all things. Prayer. O glorious Saint Thomas Aquinas, angelic doctor and master of truth, enlighten my mind so that I may seek wisdom with humility and love. Help me unite faith and reason, understanding that all truth comes from God. Grant me a pure heart, free from the vanities of the world, and a soul thirsty for the divine presence. Intercede for me so that I may always seek nothing but you, Lord, as you did in your life. Amen. The story of Saint Thomas Aquinas teaches us that true wisdom is not just in knowledge, but in the sincere search for God. He proved that faith and reason can walk together, and that humility is the greatest virtue of a wise person. His example inspires us to persevere in our vocation, even in the face of difficulties, and to remember that the greatest treasure is not found in this world, but in the presence of God. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel Journey of the Saints, Sacred Stories. Leave a like and share so that more people can learn about the life of this great saint. And now, we want to hear from you. Which teaching of Saint Thomas Aquinas inspired you the most? Leave your comment below, and don't leave without watching the video above, specially chosen for you. May God bless you, and see you in the next story.